Hey, so you know how I always talk about my love for road trips and spontaneous adventures? Well, this time, things got a bit weird. I still can't shake it, and I guess I just need to tell someone about it. It all started when I was driving through the back roads of West Virginia. I have this vacation coming up, and, well, I was on my way to drop off my dog at this kennel I found online. It was supposed to be some top-notch place, but finding it was a whole adventure on its own. So there I was, driving my old Ford along these narrow, winding roads. The GPS on my phone wasn't connecting back here, and I was trying to make sense of the printed map I had. The trees were thick on either side of the road, making it feel like I was driving through a green tunnel. It was getting late, and I was also starting to worry that they would close before I got there. I remember thinking I should have left earlier, but you know me, always pushing things to the last minute. As I'm driving, I noticed something off to the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, which was weird enough given how remote this place was. It was standing there just off the road, tall and, well, weird is the only word I can think of. It had these large, reflective red eyes. Its body was humanoid but covered in what looked like dark, matted hair or feathers. I couldn't tell which. The strangest part was that it had these wings. Yeah, wings. Large, bat-like wings that were folded behind its back. I swear, as I'm looking at this thing, it unfolds its wings, and they must have spanned at least 8 feet from tip to tip. I'm sitting there in my car, hand on the gear stick, not sure if I should floor it or stay put. I remember my heart was racing, and I was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. But then it let out this sound, not really a scream, but more like a screech. I instantly thought of a dinosaur when I heard it. It was loud enough to make me wince, too. I'm not going to lie, I was scared. Who wouldn't be? This thing, whatever it was, didn't seem natural. It took a step towards me, and that's when I decided I wasn't sticking around to see what would happen next. I put the car in gear and sped off. I figured I could drive better going forward, so I zoomed right past the thing. As luck would have it, the kennel was about a mile up the road, which thankfully I found without any more detours. I didn't mention anything about what I saw to the lady when I checked in my dog. How could I? She'd think I was crazy. So after leaving my dog with the kennel lady, I decided to book a room at a nearby motel. I needed to clear my head, and driving back immediately didn't seem like a good idea, especially with night fully setting in. I mean, my house was only about 45 minutes away, but I was in no state of mind to deal with it. The motel was one of those places that scream budget, but it was clean enough, and more importantly, it felt safe. I barely slept that night. Every little sound outside made me jump. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, analyzing every detail. The way its eyes seemed to pierce through me, the eerie sound it made, the massive wings, all of it. The next morning, I decided to do a bit of snooping around, so to speak. My curiosity got the better of me. I started by asking the motel owner if he'd heard of any strange sightings in the area. He gave me a look, the kind that says, another one of those crazy tourists. But to my surprise, he started talking. Turns out, I wasn't the first to have seen something unexplainable in those woods. He mentioned a few other guests over the years who had similar experiences. None as close as mine, but enough to make me feel a bit less crazy. Feeling a bit more validated, I headed to a local diner for breakfast. Small towns and their diners are the best places for gossip and stories. I casually brought up the subject with the waitress, and again, I was met with that familiar mix of skepticism and intrigue. She told me about the local legend of the Mothman, how it's been a part of the town's lore for decades. Sightings, strange occurrences, unexplained events, the whole deal. But here's where it gets really interesting. Another customer, an older guy who looked like he'd lived in the area his whole life, overheard our conversation. He leaned over and, in a hushed tone, told me about an incident a few years back. A group of teenagers went into the woods for some late-night thrill and came back terrified, swearing they'd seen the Mothman. They described it just like I did. And the way this guy told the story, I could tell he didn't think it was just some tall tale. But now I had to make a decision. Should I just head back home or stick around to maybe find out more? Curiosity won, as it usually does with me. I had some extra time, and so I decided to stay another night. I couldn't leave just yet, not with so many questions swirling in my head. That evening, I went back to the diner, partly because the food was good, but mostly because I hoped to overhear more stories or maybe get into a conversation again. And guess what? I got lucky. There was a group of locals at the table next to mine, and they were discussing something about the woods. I couldn't help but eavesdrop. One of them, a middle-aged guy who looked like he spent a lot of time outdoors, was talking about strange noises he'd heard while hunting in the woods. Feeling a bit bold, I chimed in and shared a bit of my experience, leaving out the more unbelievable parts. To my surprise, they didn't laugh me off. Instead, they listened intently, and a couple of them even shared their own strange encounters. Red lights in the sky they couldn't explain, weird patterns of dead wildlife, and untraceable sounds. None of them had seen the actual creature, but they all believed there was something unusual about those woods. The next day, I decided to go back to the spot where I saw the Mothman. I know, it sounds like a bad idea, but I needed to see it in daylight. Maybe I'd find some evidence, a feather, footprints, anything to prove I wasn't just seeing things. I drove back to the same spot in the morning. It looked completely different in the daylight. Less menacing, more just an ordinary piece of forest. I got out of my car and cautiously walked around. But there was nothing, just trees, bushes, and the regular sounds of the forest. Feeling a bit foolish, I was about to head back to my car when I noticed something unusual in the dirt on the side of the road, a large print. It was too big for a deer, and the shape was all wrong for anything else I could think of. Could it be? And with that, I decided it was time to head back. This little adventure had taken up more of my time than I planned, and honestly, I was starting to feel a bit out of my depth. Seeing something unexplainable is one thing, but trying to chase down answers is another. So I started the drive back home to start my vacation. The whole way back, I kept turning over the events in my mind. What did I really see that night? I wish I had clearer answers for you. When I got home, I logged into a couple of online forums, asking if anyone could identify what I saw, but no clear answers there either. That's pretty much where my story ends. I had an encounter that I can't explain. I found some weird footprint that might be nothing, and I've got more questions than when I started. But hey, it's not like I can change anything. Sometimes you just don't get all the answers you want. If anything else comes up, or if I hear back from anyone on those forums with a plausible explanation, I'll definitely let you know. So there I was, just a regular guy driving for UPS. I'm sure you know the drill on that. Long shifts, endless packages, and the Christmas rush that turns every delivery into a race against time. It's relentless for sure. I'm based out of a small town in northern Ohio, near Lake Erie, where the winters get as cold as the football gets serious. This particular night, I remember, was December 23rd. I just had the last few deliveries before I could go home and wrap my kids' presents. I'm heading down this road, the one that's barely a road, really. It's more like a path that the trees reluctantly part for. It's almost 10 p.m., and all I can think about is getting home. The snow is coming down hard, and it's getting tougher to see. I'm used to it, though, been doing this for nearly a decade. So I put on some tunes and focus on the addresses. I pull up to this house, the last one on the route. It's one of those places that make you wonder who would live all the way out here. I grab the package, step out, and that's when I see something completely confusing. Something is standing there on two legs, like a man, but it's covered in fur, gray and white, blending in with the snow. Its eyes are like cat's eyes, piercing through the darkness. I freeze, holding the package like some sort of shield. I can see its breath in the cold air, and it's looking right at me. I remember thinking, is this a prank? Some dude trying to scare me? But the size of it? It's got to be at least 7 feet tall, and the way it looks makes me realize no person could pull off something this terrifying. I'm standing there trying to make sense of it, and it's not moving, just watching me. I'm thinking about every story I've heard of strange creatures and thinking, man, this is how those stories start, or end, for folks less lucky than me. I take a step back. It takes a step forward. We're doing this awkward dance in the snow, and I'm aware of every sound around us. My boots crunching, the engine of the truck idling, the silence of the woods. I stand there, trying to catch my breath, wondering if I should drop the package and bolt or what. But I'm a professional, right? So I go up to the house, leave the package, and hightail it out of there. The thing never comes any closer at all. Then I'm driving with one eye on the road and one on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those yellow eyes following me. The snow's still falling and the normal sounds of the truck seem louder, every creak and groan making me jump. I tell myself it's just the cold, the truck's old, it makes noise. But every shadow looks like it's moving. Every tree could be hiding, whatever that thing was. Finally, I make it back to the distribution center. It's well lit and feels like a safe haven after what I just experienced. I park the truck, making sure to back it in. Obviously, I don't see anything unusual here, but the feeling of being watched doesn't leave me. I lock up the truck, head inside, and try to act normal. But inside, my mind is racing. The few guys left are clocking out, and I consider telling them. But what am I going to say? Hey, I just saw a creature that should not exist, according to every law of nature we know. I just shake my head, clock out, and decide to keep it to myself for now. The drive home is nerve-wracking. I make it home, pull into the driveway, and just sit in my car for a moment, letting the safety of the familiar wash over me. Inside the house, the Christmas tree is still lit. My wife's asleep on the couch, waiting up for me. She stirs when I come in, asks me how my night was. I look at her, at the tree, at the normalcy of my living room, and it feels like a lifetime away from the dark, snowy road. Uneventful, I say. It's a lie, of course, but what else can I say? I'm not ready to voice it yet, not ready to deal with the questions, the disbelief, the reality of it. I don't sleep much that night. I keep replaying the encounter in my head, over and over. The next day, Christmas Eve, I'm off. The encounter is still fresh in my mind, so I decide to do a little research. I spend the day on the internet, looking up local legends, cryptid sightings in Ohio, anything that might explain what I saw. The stories are all the same: fleeting glimpses, unexplainable noises, feelings of being watched. Nothing solid, but enough to make me believe I wasn't the first to see it. I come across forums, threads of people talking about similar experiences, and the word dogman comes up. Descriptions match what I saw, and a cold feeling settles over me. This wasn't just some isolated incident. Others have seen it, felt it, and have been haunted by it. I think about going back, maybe in the daylight, to look for tracks or some sort of evidence. But part of me is terrified of what I might find, or worse, what might find me. Also, the snow from that night certainly erased anything telltale. I'm torn between wanting to prove I'm not crazy and the fear of it being all too real. The story's not over, I guess, but that's where I'm at. Still trying to make sense of it all. Still wondering what's out there. In the days that follow, I go back to work, deliver parcels, and life moves on. But every time I'm on a late shift, every time I drive past a stretch of rural road, I can't help but glance into the rearview mirror. I don't know if I want to see it again, or if I'm just proving to myself that it was real. The encounter has changed something fundamental in me. It's become a story I carry inside of myself. There have definitely been an increasing number of stories coming out of Yellowstone National Park about strange creature sightings. These stories have put people on high alert. Even I, a lifelong park goer, have been more cautious on my solo hikes in general, but after my last hiking trip, everything changed. It was September of 2019, and the leaves were starting to turn where I lived in northern Utah. And that got me to thinking about how I had always wanted to see and hike Yellowstone in the fall, a time when the crowds were lower and you could really get away and reset. I had vacation time available, so I went ahead, took a week off work, and hit the road. It took me about 5 hours to drive the 300 or so miles, but I didn't mind the drive at all. Driving gave me a chance to listen to some of my favorite music and get psyched up for my trip. It was basically a straight shot too, right up Route 15 to Route 20, and then crossing through Montana for 10 miles or so until reaching the west entrance of Yellowstone. As I got closer to Yellowstone, I started seeing images of the park in the distance, as well as wildlife crossings and things like that, and I started getting really excited about the week ahead. I had never seen a bear in the wild before, and I was really hoping to see one on this trip. I pulled up to the west gate, paid my entrance fee, and entered the park. I immediately drove to the visitor center and stopped there to get a good map and find out what the must-sees were in the park. After chatting with the ranger for a bit, I got back in my car and hit the road. My plans included staying at Madison Campground because of it being a good spot that is convenient to Old Faithful, as well as some of the other geysers that I wanted to see. It wasn't long before I arrived at the campground and set up my tent. It was strange, though, because the first thing that struck me was the smell. There was this sulfur smell in the air that was kind of gross, but also kind of intriguing. I just figured it was coming from the geysers and didn't think much more of it. Then I went to explore the nearby area a bit. I headed over to check out the Madison River and breathed it all in, amazed at how crisp and clean the air seemed near the river. Next, I headed to the Purple Mountain Trail, where I planned to hike it to the top to see the view. The trail was pretty easy going for the first mile or so, but then started to get a bit more difficult as I climbed higher and higher. I was breathing heavier as I passed through the burned pine forest and had to stop a few times to catch my breath. And then, about 3/4 of the way up, I heard a noise in the bushes off to the right side of the trail. It was a frantic, rustling sound that seemed like an animal was in trouble. I stopped and listened, but it stopped too. And then I didn't hear anything else, so I figured all was well and just continued on my hike to the top. I eventually made it to the top where the trail ended with the panoramic view of the Firehole Valley and Lower Gibbon Valley. I sat there for about 30 minutes catching my breath before heading back. But on the way back down, I heard the noise again, only this time it sounded closer. I stopped and listened for a bit, but again didn't see anything. And then all of a sudden, out from the bushes jumped what looked to be a human-like creature, but with fur covering its entire body. The creature loomed over me at about 7 feet tall and was long but muscular, very much the shape of a human male. It had long arms and legs, and its hands and feet looked almost human-like too, but with long claws at the end. The face was definitely not human, though. It had large eyes that almost looked black in color, a nose that looked like a snout, and a mouth that was open wide, showing sharp teeth. The creature made a loud screeching noise when it saw me, but it didn't take its eyes off of me, and the next thing I knew, it charged straight for me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, continuing down the trail. The creature was right behind me the whole way. I'm pretty sure it was just chasing me and not trying to catch me. Thankfully, I made it back to my car and was able to drive away. I sat there wondering what to do or who to call, but that was when I realized that I had left my phone in my bag back at the campsite, so I couldn't call for help. I drove to the nearest ranger station and told them what happened. I almost fell to the floor when they told me that there have been dozens of reports of these creatures in the park recently. To be honest, I can't believe they admitted it. They told me that they don't know what they are, but that they are definitely not human and aren't sure if they are aggressive or not. They said they've tried to catch one but haven't yet been able to. The rangers said that if I see one again, to definitely stay away and not engage with it. I told them that it was silly to even say that to me, because obviously I wouldn't engage with something that had just chased me for over a mile down a hill. I left the ranger station and went back to my campsite thinking that I would suck it up and continue with my week in Yellowstone despite what had just happened. But I have to admit, I was pretty shaken up by the whole experience and ended up barely getting through that night. The next morning, I couldn't even bring myself to check out Old Faithful. I was just too damn scared of what I might run into again. So, I packed up and drove myself straight back to Utah and enjoyed the rest of the week in the safety of my own home. Have you ever had a run-in with a creature like this? If so, what did you do? Tell us about it in the comments below. I wanted to share my experience with you, and I hope you can use it so that people know they aren't alone, because I know firsthand how seeing things like this can make you feel. So anyway, this is what happened. My mother lives in Ohio, and she had just turned 70. I figured I'd fly down to visit her as a birthday present. I should mention it was a dream of Mom's to live deep in the woods on a ton of land. Her dream came true. She lives in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by deep woods with no neighbors. While I was there, and after she went to bed, I would sneak out to smoke a cigarette. She would kill me if she knew I smoked. Anyway, one night, I went into the woods to burn one and get some fresh air. Everything was going great when out of nowhere I got a whiff of the most rancid smell I've ever smelled in my entire life. It was like wet dog, burnt hair, and week-old garbage on steroids. My eyes immediately teared up. I was wondering if my mom was throwing trash out into the woods and turned on the flashlight on my phone. Looking for the trash, the smell kept getting worse and worse. I had to tuck my nose into my shirt, and even that was barely helping. I was about to give up when I heard a huge thud on the ground next to me. I flashed my light on it, expecting to find a large animal, but it turned out to be a huge rock. Confused, I started looking around me, wondering where this thing could have come from. Before I could complete the thought, I heard another boulder whiz by my head. I was seriously freaked out, so I charged in the direction the rock came from and yelled some profanities as intimidatingly as I could. The putrid smell overwhelmed me, and before I could turn back, I came face to face with a terrifying ape-like beast. It was like time froze. I saw its beady eyes, furry head, hairy body, and a face like a demonic caveman. I heard a huge growl that was deep, bellowing, and unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I sprinted away as fast as I could towards the house. The sounds that came out of this thing were awful, truly something out of a horror film. I will never forget the sound of its growl. As I ran, I could hear it coming after me from behind. The sounds of its grunts as it ran still haunt me to this day. I busted through the front door, slammed it behind me, and locked it. The second I turned the lock, the beast banged against the door. I had made it inside to safety by seconds. It continued to pound on the door, shaking the entire frame of the house. I had no idea what to do. I stepped back from the door in fear as the ape-like behemoth punched the door repeatedly. My mom came running out of her bedroom screaming, "What the hell is that?" I couldn't speak, and I was in fear for my life. We started grabbing tables, chairs, and heavy furniture and began barricading the front door. The sounds finally stopped, and I felt a rush of relief flood my body. My mom asked me again, "What the hell is that?" I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, so I replied, "You have to be careful with bears around here, Mom." As soon as I finished my sentence, a huge slam came from the side of the house. I grabbed a kitchen knife, headed over to the sound, and prayed I wouldn't have to use the knife. The creature kept pounding on the house, and I could see the frame bending in more with each hit. If he kept this up long enough, the wall would cave in. "Where's Dad's shotgun?" I asked Mom in a panic. She froze. My dad was an avid hunter before he died, but my mom had never held a gun in her life. I grabbed her by the shoulders as the pounding of the walls continued. "Mom, this is life or death. Where's Dad's shotgun?" I don't know, she cried. "Maybe under the bed? I don't know." It was my last hope. I ran into her bedroom and began pulling everything out from under her bed. I threw a box, sewing machine, old yearbooks, my lacrosse trophies, and all sorts of other junk out of the way. Finally, I felt the cold of the shotgun barrel. I didn't even check if it was loaded. I ran straight back out into the living room where the creature was in full swing. Suddenly, silence filled the air. You could hear a pin drop in the house. I heard the wind howling outside and the trees rustling, but no more bashing. I slowly crept out the back door, shotgun at the ready, and crept over to the side of the house. I tried to be as quiet as possible, taking light steps and holding my breath. I could feel my heart pounding as I turned the corner. It was dark outside and I could barely see anything. I went over to where the creature was attacking, and the house was ripped to shreds. Debris littered the yard and chunks of wood were ripped off the house. Large portions were bashed in, and you could begin seeing a faint light from the inside of the house. Had the creature continued, he would have broken through the wall in a matter of minutes. Next thing I knew, I heard this terrifyingly aggressive roar from behind me. I whipped around and saw the beast sprinting towards me, his huge, lumbering arms propelling his giant body towards me at an impressive speed. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, and fired a shot off. I heard the dirt as the creature stopped himself with force. Now, silence. I fired another shot and heard a strange whooping from the large ape. He took off into the forest so fast I could barely see. I listened to his giant footsteps until they disappeared into the night. I went back inside, Mom quivering in fear. "Is it dead?" she asked. "You have to be careful leaving food out around the bears, Mom," I replied, and went into the guest bedroom. I closed the door, fell to the floor, and contemplated how close we came to death. Was it a Bigfoot? If you're asking me, I'm thinking, what else could it possibly be?